At 55, I thought I had mastered life. My schedule was precise to the minute, my career flawless. I could tell you exactly where I'd be at 9:45 a.m. on a Tuesday 3 weeks from now, but I couldn't tell you the last time I had lunch with my son. That became painfully clear at the school assembly. My 15-year-old son stepped onto the stage to receive an award. I straightened my tie, ready to stand when he called me up. Instead, he said, "I'd like to thank Mr. Carter for always being there." Mr. Carter, not Dad. I felt 100 eyes turn to me, a stranger in my own child's life. The truth hit like a freight train. While I was building quarterly reports, someone else was building memories with my son. Afterward, he walked past me without a glance, heading straight to the man who had been at every game, every performance, every moment I missed. That night, I opened my planner. There were meetings, presentations, deadlines, but not a single block of time for my family. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I had been avoiding for years. What if I had been building the wrong life all along? I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where dreams felt too big for the streets you walked on. My parents worked hard, my dad at a factory, my mom as a secretary, but there was always just enough, never more. We didn't take vacations. We didn't talk about careers. We talked about bills, about how to make ends meet. At 18, I promised myself my life would be different. I didn't want just enough. I wanted more, security, stability, the kind of life where my kids wouldn't ever hear their parents arguing over an overdue electric bill. That promise carried me through college, through my first job at a mid-sized finance firm. I worked harder than anyone else. I was the first in and the last to leave, the kind of employee bosses loved and colleagues admired, at least in the beginning. Somewhere in the middle of those years, I met Claire. She was working in marketing at a smaller agency in the same building. She had this laugh, full, effortless, and an ability to see right through my defenses. When I told her about my childhood, my dreams of building a better life, she didn't roll her eyes the way some did. She believed in me. We married 2 years later. I was 28. She was 26, and we stood in front of a modest group of friends and family, promising to build a future together. Back then, we pictured a house with a yard, 2 kids, maybe a dog. We didn't talk about overtime or late-night flights, or the endless pressure to deliver results. Our first few years of marriage were the happiest I can remember. We bought a small starter home, the kind of place where we could paint the walls ourselves and laugh at our mistakes. Our first child, Ethan, was born 3 years into our marriage. I still remember holding him at the hospital, making another promise, this one deeper than any before, that I would give him the life I never had. That's where the schedule began. At first, it wasn't rigid. I kept a simple planner, balancing work commitments with Ethan's milestones, his first steps, his first words, his first birthday. Claire stayed home with him, and in those days, she'd send me photos of every little moment I missed. I told myself it was temporary, that my long hours were an investment in our future. The promotions came quickly. By the time our second child, Emily, was born, I was already in a senior management role. The raise that came with it meant we could afford the bigger house, the better schools, the security I'd dreamed of. Claire often said she was proud of me, and I believed her. She told friends how hard I worked, how dedicated I was to providing for our family. Ethan would brag to his classmates that his dad worked in a big office downtown. Those words fueled me. Every late night, every weekend spent on reports, felt justified. My family saw me as a success story, the embodiment of the American dream. I wore that role like armor. The twist was subtle, almost invisible. My dedication wasn't questioned, not then. My absence was reframed as sacrifice. Claire's smiles at family gatherings, Ethan's excitement when I brought home small gifts from business trips, even Emily's laughter when I picked her up on rare afternoons. All of it felt like confirmation that I was doing the right thing. The truth was, we were all buying into the same narrative, that my work was for them, that the missed dinners and postponed vacations were just temporary, that the future payoff would outweigh the present cost. Back then, there were no cracks I could see. At company events, I was praised as a man who had it all. The career, the house, the picture-perfect family. Colleagues asked me for advice on balancing work and home, and I'd smile, thinking I'd found the secret. Looking back, I can see it so clearly, the seeds of what was coming. But in those days, I was blind to it. All I saw was the next milestone, the next promotion, the next raise, the next goal that would secure the life I thought my family wanted. I didn't know then that the very schedule I used to protect them would one day be the thing that pushed them away. By the time I turned 40, my life was scheduled down to the minute. My mornings began before sunrise, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, scanning through emails before the kids were even awake. My commute was a blur of conference calls, and my evenings often ended under the cold glow of my laptop in a quiet hotel room hundreds of miles from home. At first, Claire adjusted. She understood, or at least tried to. She would text me photos from Ethan's soccer games, videos of Emily learning to ride her bike. When I missed bedtime, she would tell the kids, "Daddy's working hard for us." It was the kind of reassurance that made me feel justified, even proud. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to change. I noticed it the first time when I came home from a business trip and found out I'd missed Ethan's piano recital. It wasn't that Claire hadn't told me. It was that she stopped telling me about events unless I asked. Her reasoning was simple. I didn't want you to feel bad if you couldn't make it. At first, I told myself it was thoughtful of her. Less guilt for me, less disappointment for them. But deep down, I felt something shift. I didn't ask why she'd stopped sharing every little detail. I didn't want to face the answer. The kids adapted too. They stopped running to the door when I came home late at night. Ethan, once full of stories about his day, started summarizing in a few short sentences. Emily's excitement shifted to showing me drawings or projects only when I happened to be around, not saving them for my return. There was no big fight, no dramatic turning point, just a quiet, steady drift. My schedule grew tighter. The company was expanding, and with each promotion came more responsibility. My calendar looked like a patchwork quilt of deadlines, meetings, and travel dates. Every empty space was quickly filled. Claire stopped asking if I'd be home for dinner. She stopped leaving an empty chair at the table. Meals became her and the kids, while I was just another voice calling in from a hotel lobby or a quiet airport gate. There were still moments that fooled me into thinking everything was fine. A weekend trip to the lake when a project was delayed. A rare evening at home when we all watched a movie together. Claire would smile, the kids would laugh, and I'd tell myself these moments proved we were still connected. But each time I left again, it got a little harder to slip back in when I returned. The inside jokes kept multiplying without me. The routines no longer included me. And yet, no one complained. That silence was more dangerous than any argument. The twist came one evening when I called home from Chicago. I just finished a dinner with a client when I remembered that Emily's school had a family art night. I dialed Claire to ask how it went. "It was nice," she said simply. "Did Emily have fun?" "Yes." There was a pause. I waited for her to tell me more, to describe the paintings, the other parents, something, but she didn't. "Did she ask about me?" I pressed. "She knows you're busy," Claire replied, her tone soft but edged with something I couldn't quite name. That was the moment I realized she wasn't telling me everything anymore. Not out of spite, but because she'd stopped expecting me to be part of those memories. I hung up and stared at my perfectly organized itinerary for the next month. It was full, every minute accounted for. But there was no space for Claire, no space for Ethan, no space for Emily. And the truth was, I didn't notice how far I drifted because the drift was so quiet. By the time I turned 50, I had everything I thought I wanted. I was named Executive of the Year in my industry, my face on the cover of a trade magazine, my name spoken with respect in every boardroom I walked into. The night of the award ceremony felt like the peak of my career. The ballroom was draped in gold and white, tables lined with fine china, glasses filled with champagne. I had spent years climbing toward this moment, and for once, I allowed myself to enjoy it. Claire came with me, wearing a black evening dress I'd bought her years ago but rarely saw her wear. She looked beautiful, but there was something in her eyes, a distance like she was present in body, but her mind was elsewhere. I told myself it was just nerves from being in such a public setting. The speeches began, and I waited for my name to be called. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. Then it buzzed again, and again. I glanced down discreetly. It was a text from Ethan. "Emily's sick. Fever's really high." I froze. I looked at Claire. She hadn't checked her phone, hadn't said a word. The room around me faded for a moment. My instinct was to stand, to walk out, to call home, but at that exact second, my name echoed through the speakers. The applause was deafening. I walked to the stage, my phone heavy in my pocket, Ethan's message sitting there unanswered. The host handed me the award, a polished glass trophy with my name etched in gold. Cameras flashed. People clapped. I smiled for the photos, said all the right words about teamwork and dedication, but my mind was 1,000 miles away. When I finally stepped off the stage, I checked my phone. Another text from Ethan. "She's asking for you." I turned to Claire. She had seen the messages by then. Her face was calm, too calm. "She'll be fine," she said quietly. "Go finish your night." That hurt more than I expected. I told myself it was just one night. Emily had Claire. She had doctors if needed. My presence wouldn't change the fever. And yet the guilt gnawed at me as I posed for more photos, as I shook more hands, as the congratulations poured in. Later that night, in the hotel room, I called home. Emily was asleep, her fever breaking. Ethan answered quietly. "She kept asking if you were coming." I wanted to explain, to tell him how important the night had been for my career, for all of us. But I couldn't bring myself to say it. That night, lying in bed beside Claire, I stared at the award on the dresser. It gleamed under the soft light, a perfect symbol of everything I had worked for. But all I could think about was my daughter, lying in her bed at home, whispering my name and not hearing my voice. The next morning, as we checked out, Claire slipped the award into its case without a word. She smiled for the photographers outside, holding my arm just tight enough for appearances. It was then I realized something had shifted, not just in her, but in me. The success I had built my life around didn't feel as solid anymore. It felt fragile, empty, and just a little bit poisoned by the moments I kept missing. Claire had always been strong, but over the years, I watched that strength shift. It wasn't the quiet, supportive strength she'd shown in our early years. It became a different kind of strength. The kind you develop when you stop waiting for help that never comes. At first, I didn't notice the change. She handled everything while I was gone. School drop-offs, doctor appointments, the endless cycle of homework, meals, and bedtime routines. It was easy to tell myself that everything was fine. She was capable. The kids were thriving. I was doing my part by working hard. But beneath the surface, something fundamental had shifted. I remember coming home from a week-long business trip to find the house running like a well-oiled machine, without me. Claire had reorganized the kitchen, managed the bills, signed permission slips, and arranged carpools. She didn't need me. At first, I took it as a compliment. She was resourceful, independent. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it meant my absence was no longer disruptive. I had become optional in my own home. The kids adapted even faster than Claire. Ethan, now a teenager, started going to a neighbor's house for advice about schoolwork. Emily, still young but perceptive, began showing her art projects to Claire before they were ever dry, rather than waiting for me to come home. I was no longer part of the rhythm of their lives. The twist came on my birthday. For 10 years, without fail, Ethan and Emily had made handmade cards for me. They were simple, construction paper, markers, maybe a few stickers, but they meant everything. Even when I was away, Claire would scan them and send me photos. That year, there was nothing. I got a text from Claire. "Happy birthday. We'll celebrate when you're back." But there were no cards. When I asked about it on a call, there was a long pause. "They just forgot," she said. I knew they hadn't forgotten. Kids don't just forget a tradition they've held for a decade. They'd stopped because it no longer felt important, because I wasn't there to open them. That realization cut deeper than I expected. I told myself I'd fix it when I got home, that we'd do something special. But when I walked through the door a week later, there was no mention of my birthday. No belated dinner, no saved cake. Life had moved on without me. Claire didn't say anything about it. She just continued with her routines, efficient and composed. But her silence spoke volumes. Ethan was at a friend's house. Emily was in her room, drawing quietly. I stood in the kitchen, the sound of the refrigerator humming louder than the conversation we weren't having. I wanted to ask Claire if she was angry. I wanted to ask if she was disappointed. But I didn't, because deep down, I already knew the answer. The family had adapted. They had learned how to live without me, not out of spite, but out of necessity. And the more they adapted, the less space there was for me to fit back in. It's strange how easy it is to lose your place in your own family. It doesn't happen with a dramatic goodbye. It happens in the quiet spaces, in the missed moments, in the birthdays that pass without cards. I told myself things would get better once work slowed down. But work never slowed down. And the longer I stayed away, the more they built a life that didn't need me in it. I had always thought of myself as the provider, the foundation of the family. But somewhere along the way, I realized I had become more like a guest. Welcome when I showed up, but not essential. And that realization, as much as I tried to ignore it, stayed with me. There were so many chances to turn things around. Looking back now, they were obvious. At the time, I told myself they were small moments, moments I could make up for later. Ethan invited me to his championship soccer game. "Dad, it's the final," he said, his eyes bright. I looked at my calendar, back-to-back client meetings, then a flight to Dallas. I promised I'd try, knowing full well I wouldn't. On the day of the game, I checked the score from my phone in an airport lounge. They won. The team photo popped up on the school's website later that week. I zoomed in on Ethan, grinning, his arms around his teammates. But standing behind the team was Mr. Carter, the neighbor who had been to every game. Emily had a school festival. She begged me to come see her class performance. "It's just 10 minutes," she said. I booked my flight a day later, thinking I could still make it. Then a client pushed for an early morning meeting. I sent flowers to her classroom, thinking it would soften the disappointment. When I got back, the flowers were wilting in a vase. Emily didn't mention the festival. She just showed me a ribbon she'd won, then went back to her drawing. Claire never yelled. She never accused. She just stopped reminding me. If I asked about events, she'd tell me. If I didn't, she wouldn't bring them up. The twist came at the parent-teacher conference. It was one of the rare times I managed to show up. I walked into the classroom, adjusting my tie, ready to hear about grades and progress. Claire was already there. She wasn't alone. Sitting next to her was a man I didn't recognize. Well-dressed, confident. He stood when I entered, offering a polite smile. "Hi," Claire said, her tone even. "This is Daniel. He's been helping with some school projects." Helping. The word sat in my stomach like a stone. Daniel shook my hand. His grip was firm, his expression neutral. There was nothing inappropriate in his manner, nothing overtly hostile, but his presence spoke volumes. As the teacher began discussing Ethan's academic progress, I glanced sideways. Claire listened attentively, occasionally exchanging quiet comments with Daniel. They looked comfortable. It wasn't what they said, it was what they didn't need to say. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Defensiveness, jealousy, but also guilt. Because in that moment, I couldn't argue that Claire had been left alone to handle everything. And if someone had stepped in to help, could I really blame her? Still, as we left the classroom, the air between us felt heavier than it had in a long time. In the hallway, I started to speak. "Claire." She cut me off gently. "Don't make this about you tonight. It's about the kids. The kids. Always the kids." Daniel walked ahead, chatting easily with Ethan. I followed a few steps behind, feeling like an outsider at my own child's school. I didn't ask who Daniel really was. I didn't have to. The bigger question was why I was just noticing now. That night, back at home, I opened my calendar. My next trip was already booked. My next chance to be present was weeks away. And even as I sat there, I didn't move anything around. I didn't cancel the trip. The wake-up calls were everywhere. I just kept ignoring them. The house had grown quiet over the years, but now the silence felt different. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a family resting after a long day. It was heavy, strained, like everyone was careful not to make noise that might lead to an argument. Dinner was the clearest sign of how far things had drifted. We used to talk about school, work, plans for the weekend. Now, dinner was a few minutes of small talk, then the sound of dishes being cleared. Claire spoke to me politely, but never beyond what was necessary. Ethan answered questions with one-word responses. Emily kept her eyes on her plate. It was like we were three separate worlds, orbiting the same kitchen table without ever touching. Claire had her own routines now. She spent more time with friends, more time at community events. She no longer asked about my travel schedule, and I stopped offering it. We operated like roommates who shared children and bills, nothing more. Ethan was applying to colleges. I knew this because Claire mentioned it briefly one evening, her voice neutral, as if she were commenting on the weather. Applications are due next month. That was all she said. I told myself I'd sit down with him, talk about schools, offer advice. But the days passed, and I was always too busy or too tired. Then, one night, I came home early from a business dinner. The house was quiet, the lights low. I passed by Ethan's room and noticed his desk was covered in papers. I don't know why I stopped. Maybe I was looking for some way to connect. That's when I saw it, an application form for a university. His handwriting was neat, careful. I scanned the page, my eyes catching on one section, parent or guardian contact information. The name listed wasn't mine. It was Daniel Carter. My chest tightened as I read it again, thinking maybe I was mistaken. But there it was, in black ink. The phone number wasn't mine either. I stood there for a long moment, my hands gripping the edge of the desk. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to storm downstairs and demand an explanation. But more than anything, I felt an emptiness I couldn't describe. Because deep down, I understood. Ethan hadn't listed me because I wasn't the person he counted on. When the school needed a parent, when a problem needed solving, when someone had to show up, it wasn't me. It hadn't been me for a long time. I left the application where I found it and went to my office. I sat there in the dark, the glow of my computer screen casting shadows on the walls lined with plaques and awards. Every accomplishment felt hollow in that moment. The next morning at breakfast, I looked at Ethan across the table. He didn't know I'd seen the form. He talked about homework, about a project due next week. I nodded, my coffee cooling in my hands, trying to find the right words. But I didn't say anything. I told myself there would be a better time. There wasn't. That was the point of no return. The moment I realized my family wasn't just drifting away. They were already gone. It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind of day my calendar was built around. I was in the middle of a high-stakes meeting with a potential partner, the kind that could bring in millions for the company. The conference room was sleek, the table lined with neatly printed proposals, the air thick with the sound of negotiations. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. I glanced down discreetly. 5 missed calls from Ethan's number. My chest tightened, but I told myself it could wait. Maybe it was about a school form or a ride or something minor. I didn't want to disrupt the flow of the meeting. The phone buzzed once more. This time a text popped up. Ethan's been in an accident. The words blurred for a moment. My ears rang. I stood abruptly, mumbling something about an emergency, and stepped out into the hallway. My hands shook as I called back. No answer. Then another text came through, not from Ethan, but from an unfamiliar number. This is Daniel Carter. Ethan's okay, minor accident. I'm with him at the hospital. Daniel. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles whitened. My son had been in an accident, and the first person he called wasn't me. It wasn't his mother. It was Daniel. I rushed out of the building, barely remembering to grab my keys. The drive to the hospital felt endless, every red light a personal punishment. My mind ran in circles. Was he hurt? How bad was it? Why didn't he call me? When I finally arrived, I spotted them in the waiting room. Ethan sat on a chair, a small bandage on his forehead, his arm in a sling. Daniel sat beside him, leaning forward, talking quietly. Ethan looked up when he saw me. His expression was calm, polite, almost distant. "Hey, Dad." I knelt beside him. "Are you okay? What happened?" "It's fine, just a fender bender. Daniel got here fast." I glanced at Daniel, who gave a measured nod. "He called me right away," Daniel said. The words stung more than I wanted to admit. I should have been the first call. I should have been the one sitting here when Ethan walked in. But I wasn't. Claire arrived a few minutes later, her face pale but composed. She thanked Daniel, her gratitude effortless, as if this wasn't the first time he'd stepped in. I stood there, feeling like an intruder in my own son's crisis. Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then set it aside. I caught a glimpse of the screen. Messages from friends checking in. Not one from me. As we left the hospital, Ethan rode home with Claire. Daniel stayed behind to finalize some paperwork. I walked to my car alone. On the drive back, the weight of it settled in. My son didn't see me as the person to call in an emergency. He hadn't for a long time, and that realization hurt more than any words ever could. Claire didn't wait long to confront me. It happened the evening after the hospital incident. The house was quiet. Ethan was in his room, Emily at a friend's house. Claire stood by the kitchen counter, arms crossed, her expression steady but cold. "We need to talk," she said. I set my briefcase down, already feeling defensive. "About Ethan? He's fine. The doctor said—" "This isn't about the accident," she cut in. "It's about everything that led to the accident being handled by someone else. Do you realize what it means that he called Daniel first?" Her words were sharp, but it wasn't the volume. It was the precision. I hesitated. "He was probably just—" "Don't finish that sentence," she said, her voice rising slightly for the first time. "Don't make excuses. You've been making excuses for years. You have a calendar for every meeting, every flight, every dinner. You have a schedule for quarterly reports 3 months from now. But you don't have a minute for us. For him." I looked at her, searching for the right defense, the right combination of words to explain. But all I could think of was my phone buzzing in that meeting, and me ignoring it. "You think you can just show up when it's convenient for you?" she continued, stepping closer. "You think being the provider is enough. But Ethan doesn't need a provider. He needs a father. And he's stopped seeing you as that." The words landed like a blow. I forced a calm tone. "Claire, I know I've been busy, but I can make changes. I can adjust my schedule." From the doorway, Ethan's voice cut in. "Don't promise that, Dad." We both turned. He stood there leaning on the frame, his expression unreadable. I tried to smile, to soften the moment. "Ethan, does your schedule have room for me?" he asked, his tone steady, almost too steady. I opened my mouth, but the answer didn't come. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on mine. "Because if it doesn't, then don't promise anything. Don't say you'll try. Don't say we'll make it up later. Just don't." I felt something sink inside me. Ethan didn't look angry. Anger would have been easier to respond to. He looked tired. Tired of waiting. Tired of hoping. Claire didn't speak. She just watched, letting the silence hang. "I've heard you say the same thing my whole life," Ethan went on. "After this project, after this quarter, after the next promotion, and then it's always something else." I wanted to tell him this time would be different. I wanted to tell him I could fix it. But in that moment, I realized he had no reason to believe me. "You called Daniel," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. Ethan didn't flinch. "Yeah, because he shows up." The words were blunt, but they weren't cruel. They were just the truth. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of it settle in my chest. "You're right," I said finally. Ethan looked almost surprised at my admission, but he didn't respond. He just turned and walked back toward his room. Claire stepped closer, her voice softer now but no less firm. "This is it, Michael. You either change now, or there's nothing left to save. I can't keep holding this family together on my own, and I won't ask the kids to keep waiting for a version of you that doesn't exist." I stood there in the kitchen long after she left, staring at my phone on the counter. My calendar was full for the next 2 months. Flights, meetings, dinners, every slot booked. Not a single one for my family. For the first time, I wondered what would happen if I started deleting them. That night, after Ethan's words, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my home office surrounded by the symbols of my so-called success. Awards, framed certificates, photos from company events. They felt heavier than the furniture itself, each one a reminder of the years I'd traded for the life I thought I was building. I stared at my calendar, full of color-coded commitments, each more urgent than the one before it. But for the first time, none of it seemed important. All I could think about was Ethan's question. "Does your schedule have room for me?" The honest answer was no. That realization hollowed me out in a way no business setback ever could. Deals could be renegotiated. Clients could be replaced. But the role of father, that was time-sensitive, and I was running out of it. The next morning, I drove to the office in a fog. My assistant met me at the door, rattling off updates about the quarterly review, a pending merger, a call with overseas investors. I nodded mechanically, but I wasn't hearing her. Half an hour into the review meeting, surrounded by executives in tailored suits, I felt it. The crushing sense that I didn't belong here anymore. Not because I wasn't capable, but because the cost was too high. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from Claire. "Ethan skipped practice today. Stayed in his room. He's quiet." I looked at the room around me. Charts, projections, a dozen voices debating market trends. And all I could see was my son, shutting himself off a little more each day. Something inside me broke. I closed my laptop. The room went quiet as heads turned toward me. "Michael?" one of the VPs asked. "I'm done," I said simply. A few confused laughs echoed around the table, but I didn't smile. "I'm stepping down, effective immediately." Silence. The CEO leaned forward, his expression a mix of disbelief and concern. "This isn't the time to make impulsive decisions. Let's talk about this." "It's not impulsive," I said, my voice steady. "It's 20 years overdue." I stood, feeling the weight lift even as the room filled with stunned murmurs. My assistant looked shocked, but I could see something else in her eyes. Respect. I walked out, not to applause, not to a send-off, just a quiet exit. For once, I didn't need the ceremony. In the elevator, I pulled out my phone and opened my calendar. My finger hovered over each event, each meeting, each dinner. One by one, I deleted them. The screen grew emptier with every swipe. When I reached home, Claire was in the kitchen. She looked at me, surprised. "You're home early," she said carefully. "I left the company," I told her. Her eyes widened slightly. "You... what?" "I quit. No more meetings, no more trips, no more excuses." She didn't rush to hug me. She didn't smile. She studied me for a long moment, as if weighing the truth of my words. "This isn't about proving something," she said finally. "This has to be real. Consistent. Not just a gesture." "I know," I said. And I meant it. Ethan came downstairs a few minutes later, glancing between us. "You're home," he said flatly. "I am," I replied. "For how long?" "As long as you'll have me." He didn't answer right away, but he didn't turn away either. That night, for the first time in years, I sat at the dinner table without my phone. It wasn't a grand reconciliation. It was awkward, quiet, but it was a start. For the first time, I had chosen them over everything else. And that choice, the one I should have made years ago, felt like the moment of truth. The morning after I quit, I woke up without an alarm for the first time in decades. It was strange, unsettling even, not to have my day mapped out in advance. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, watching sunlight spill across the floor, and wondered if this was what freedom felt like, or if it was just the start of another mistake. Claire walked in, still in her robe, her hair pulled back loosely. She looked at me like I was a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. "You're still here," she said. "I told you. I left the company," I replied. She poured herself coffee, studying me carefully. "And you expect me to believe you did that for us?" Her words hit harder than I expected. "I did it because I realized I can't keep living the way I was. I can't keep missing everything." She leaned against the counter. "You've missed almost 2 decades of everything, Michael. Forgive me if I'm not ready to throw you a parade because you decided to quit after your son had to call another man from the hospital." I nodded slowly, taking it in. I wanted her to see it as a gesture of change, but she saw it as a performance, and maybe she had a point. "I'm not asking for a parade," I said quietly. "I'm asking for a chance." The next few days were awkward. My calendar, once overflowing with calls and flights, was empty. I tried to fill it with the family instead. I made breakfast. I picked Emily up from school. I went to Ethan's soccer practice. Not just the championship game, but a regular practice. He was surprised to see me standing on the sidelines. "You don't have a meeting?" he asked, skeptical. "Not today," I answered. "Or tomorrow?" "Not tomorrow either." He nodded, but his expression stayed guarded. The twist came later that week. Claire asked to talk after dinner. "I need to be honest," she said, sitting across from me. "I don't know if you're doing this for us, or if you're doing it to make some statement to your colleagues. A big, dramatic exit. Michael Bennett leaves the corporate world to focus on family. Sounds like a headline you'd secretly enjoy." Her words stung because they weren't completely unfair. My entire career had been built on appearances. Leaving like this, people would talk, maybe even admire me for it. But that wasn't why I left. "I don't care what the company thinks," I said. "For once, I care about what happens in this house more than anything outside of it." She studied me for a long moment. "If that's true, you'll have to prove it. Not in a week, not in a month. Over time. Because right now, this feels like another promise I've heard before." "I will," I said, even though I knew words alone meant nothing. The next morning, I started making real changes. I cleared the home office of all work files. I took down the framed magazine covers and awards, replacing them with family photos, many of which I wasn't in. I asked Ethan if I could drive him to school. He hesitated, then agreed. The drive was quiet, but it wasn't hostile. It was a start. I picked Emily up from art class and actually sat with her as she explained her projects. She was shy at first, unsure if my attention was real. But when I showed up again the next day, she smiled more easily. These weren't grand, cinematic gestures. They were small, daily actions. The kind that don't make headlines, but slowly rebuild trust. Still, Claire's skepticism lingered. One evening, she found me sitting at the table with my laptop. "You're working again?" she asked. "Just booking a family trip," I said, turning the screen to show her. "No meetings, no speeches, just us." She looked at the screen, then back at me. "We'll see." Her doubt was understandable. I had built my life on schedules and promises, and too often I'd broken them. But for the first time in years, I wasn't planning my next deal or my next move. I was planning my next moment with them. And that, I realized, was the real grand gesture. Not quitting my job, but showing up every day after. The first few weeks after I quit, the house didn't suddenly feel warmer. If anything, it felt tense. My presence was no longer a rare event, but that didn't mean it was welcomed without question. Claire remained polite, careful, and Ethan kept his distance like I was an unfamiliar teacher filling in at school, someone temporary. I realized quickly that my decision to quit was just the first step. The real work was proving every day that it wasn't a phase. At breakfast, I tried starting conversations with Ethan about school, sports, his friends. He would nod, give short answers, then disappear into his phone. Emily was warmer. She'd tell me about her art projects or a book she was reading. But even with her, there was caution in her voice. Claire was the hardest to read. She acknowledged my efforts, but didn't give me the satisfaction of calling them progress. One evening, about a month after I'd left the company, Ethan finally spoke more than a few sentences to me. He came into my office, now stripped of corporate awards and lined with family photos, and leaned against the doorway. "There's a game next Friday," he said. "I'll be there," I answered quickly, maybe too quickly. He raised an eyebrow. "Don't promise unless you mean it. It's important." "I mean it," I said, looking him in the eye. He hesitated, then added, "We'll see." That was the test. I didn't fully realize at the time. Ethan wasn't just inviting me to a soccer game. He was testing whether I would keep my word when it mattered to him. The twist came 3 days later. I got a call from the company. Even though I had resigned, they were in the middle of a major crisis. The CEO himself called to ask if I'd come in as a consultant, for one meeting only, to help navigate the fallout. "It's the last time we'll ask," he said. "Your name still carries weight. It's tomorrow morning, 9 a.m.? Tomorrow morning. Friday. Ethan's game started at 9:30 a.m. I hung up the phone and stared at the calendar on my desk. The old me would have seen this as a scheduling conflict to solve with efficiency. Attend the meeting, send a text to Ethan, promise to make it up. But the new me had promised something different. Claire found me in the kitchen later, still staring at my phone. "Everything okay?" she asked. "The company wants me back for a meeting." "Just one," I said. She studied me. "When?" "Same time as Ethan's game." Her expression didn't change. "Then you already know the answer." It wasn't as simple as she made it sound. The company had been my life for 20 years. Walking away was one thing. Refusing to help when they called was another. That night, I lay awake thinking about it. My instinct to fix problems at work was still there, like muscle memory. But then I remembered Ethan's words. "Don't promise unless you mean it." Friday morning came. My phone buzzed with calls from the office as I drove to the school field. Each buzz felt like a temptation, a lifeline back to the world I'd dominated for so long. When I arrived at the field, Ethan was warming up. He glanced over, clearly expecting an empty spot where I should be. When he saw me, really saw me standing there, something shifted in his expression. I stayed for the entire game. I didn't check my phone once. I didn't step away to take a call. When Ethan's team scored the winning goal, he looked at the stands, and our eyes met. He didn't smile, but he nodded, just once. After the game, as we walked to the car, he said, "You actually came." "I said I would," I replied. He didn't respond right away. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, "Thanks." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a full bridge rebuilt. But it was something, a sign that maybe the test wasn't failed. That night, my phone lit up again with missed calls from the company. I ignored them. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to explain myself. I had chosen my family over the company. And for once, I knew I'd made the right call. The week after Ethan's soccer game felt different in small, almost imperceptible ways. He still didn't seek me out for conversations, but there was a subtle shift. Less guarded glances, less distance. Claire noticed it too, though she didn't comment. I think she was waiting, watching to see if I'd stumble. Rebuilding wasn't dramatic. There were no big speeches, no sudden closeness. It was quiet work, built day by day. I drove Ethan to school when he'd let me. I picked Emily up from art class. I cooked dinner on nights when Claire looked exhausted. Every gesture felt small, but I had learned that small, consistent actions mattered more than grand declarations. Then came the next test. Ethan had an academic award ceremony at school. It wasn't just for sports. It was for leadership, grades, and contributions to the school community. Claire mentioned it casually one evening. "It's on Thursday morning." "I'll be there," I said instantly. Claire raised an eyebrow. "You said that about the game, and you showed up. That helped. But this is different. This isn't just about standing on the sidelines. This is about showing up for something he values as much as you value your work." I understood what she meant. The complication came the next day. The company called again. Another crisis. Another invitation to step in as a consultant. The meeting? Thursday morning. It felt almost scripted, as if life wanted to see if I'd crack under the same pressure. This time, the decision came easier. I didn't hesitate. "I can't," I told them. "I have something more important." I could almost hear the disbelief on the other end of the line. "More important than this?" "Yes," I said, and hung up. Thursday morning, I arrived at the school auditorium early. The place was buzzing with students, parents, and faculty. I found a seat near the front, my heart pounding in a way that no boardroom ever made it. Ethan walked onto the stage with his classmates. He scanned the audience, and when his eyes found mine, there was a flicker of surprise. Then, just barely, a nod. The ceremony began. Names were called, awards handed out. When it was Ethan's turn, he stepped forward to receive his certificate. The principal congratulated him, then handed him the microphone for a brief speech. That's when it happened. The twist I didn't see coming. Ethan cleared his throat. "I want to thank my teachers, my teammates, and my dad." He paused, glancing at me. "He's here today. He's learning." There was a ripple of polite laughter from the audience, but it wasn't mocking. It was warm. I felt something tighten in my chest. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a declaration that everything was fine. But it was an acknowledgement, a crack in the wall between us. After the ceremony, Ethan walked over. "You didn't have to skip work for this," he said, almost testing me. "I wanted to," I replied. "This matters to me." He studied me for a moment, then shrugged lightly. "Well, thanks for coming." It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd had in years. Over the next few weeks, I kept showing up, not just for the big events, but for the small, everyday moments, the kind I used to miss without a second thought. Dinner conversations, weekend walks, helping Emily with her art projects, listening to Ethan talk about college plans. Claire remained cautious, but I could see her walls lowering slowly. One night, after we'd put the kids to bed, she sat across from me at the kitchen table. "You're different," she said quietly. "I'm trying to be," I answered. "You've tried before. This time I'm not trying for a promotion or for appearances. I'm trying for us." She didn't say anything right away, but she didn't look away either. That silence, for the first time, didn't feel like distance. It felt like consideration. The rebuilding was slow, imperfect, but real. And every time I looked at my calendar, empty of flights, full of family, I knew I had chosen the right meetings to attend. Transformation wasn't a moment. It was a series of quiet, deliberate choices stacked on top of each other. I didn't expect Ethan to suddenly forgive me, or for Claire to welcome me back without hesitation. Instead, I focused on the only thing I could control: showing up day after day. I drove Ethan to more practices, not just the big games. I didn't talk much during the rides. Sometimes silence was better than filling the air with apologies he'd heard before. But over time, he began to talk on his own, about classes, teammates, even about his worries over college. Emily grew more open too. Her drawings began to feature all of us again, not just her and Claire. One afternoon, she showed me a sketch of our family sitting around the dinner table. For the first time in years, I was in the picture. Claire noticed these changes, though she remained cautious. We started spending more time together. Family dinners without the tension, walks in the neighborhood, small conversations at night that didn't revolve around conflict. It wasn't dramatic, it was steady. And I knew that was what made it real. The twist came one evening as Ethan and I sat at the kitchen table. He was working on a college application, tapping his pen nervously. "You know," he said without looking up, "I've been thinking about schools." I nodded. "Any top choices?" "Yeah, a couple. And I want you to come with me on the campus visits." I froze for a moment, unsure if I'd heard him right. "You want me there?" He looked up, meeting my eyes. "Yeah, I think it'd be good. You can see where I might end up. Maybe help me figure out what's right." It was a small sentence, but it landed like a tidal wave. After years of being shut out, he was inviting me in, not because Claire asked him to, not because it was a performance for anyone else, but because he wanted me there. "I'd like that," I said quietly. He nodded and went back to his application, but the corners of his mouth lifted slightly. "That night," I told Claire. She smiled. Not the polite, careful smile I'd seen for years, but something softer. "That's a big step," she said. "I know," I replied, "and I'm not taking it for granted." In the weeks that followed, we visited campuses together. We walked through lecture halls, dormitories, and cafeterias. Ethan asked my opinion on programs, on student life, even on dorm sizes. At one campus, as we stood in the courtyard, he turned to me. "You know, I used to think you wouldn't be around for this stuff. That maybe I'd just do it with Mom. But I'm glad you're here." It wasn't an emotional declaration, but for Ethan, it might as well have been. In that moment, I realized the transformation wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building a future together, even if it looked different than what I'd imagined years ago. By the time we returned home, something fundamental had shifted. Ethan's walls weren't gone, but they were lower. Claire's trust wasn't complete, but it was growing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I truly belonged in my own family's life. There's a strange clarity that comes when you've lost something and fought to earn it back. I used to think wisdom came from success, promotions, bonuses, awards. But the truth is, my wisdom came from failure. I failed my family, and the lesson that saved me was simple. A perfect schedule is worthless if it doesn't include the people you love. In the months after Ethan invited me to his college visits, I began to see just how much my priorities had shifted. My calendar, once stacked with color-coded business obligations, now had a different kind of structure. Monday morning, breakfast with Emily before school. Wednesday evening, dinner at home with Claire, no distractions. Saturday afternoon, drive with Ethan just to talk. There were still errands, bills, and occasional work projects, but they were no longer at the center of my life. Claire noticed the difference too. One night, over coffee, she said, "You know, I didn't think I'd see this version of you again." "This version?" I asked. "The one who's here. The one who shows up without checking his phone every 5 minutes. The one who actually listens." I smiled. It only took me 20 years to figure it out. She didn't laugh, but she reached across the table and rested her hand on mine. It wasn't forgiveness in a single gesture, but it was something steady. Ethan was more subtle in his acceptance. He didn't suddenly become chatty or overly sentimental, but the distance had shortened. He'd ask me about my opinion on things, college, sports, even music, and every time he did, I felt the quiet acknowledgement that I had earned a seat back in his life. The real twist came on a Sunday evening. I was sitting at my desk, filling in my planner for the week ahead. Old habits die hard, and I still like to map out my days. Ethan walked in, holding a brochure from one of the universities we'd visited. "They have a spring event for admitted students," he said. "It's a weekend thing. You should come." I looked up at him. "You want me there?" "Yeah," he said simply. "I put the dates on the fridge. Thought you might want to put it in your, whatever it is you use now." I smiled. "Planner," I said. "Yeah, that." After he left, I looked down at my planner. The first blank space stared back at me. I picked up my pen and without hesitation wrote, "Time with my son, no interruptions." It was the first thing on the week's list. No flights, no meetings, no distractions. For years, my schedule had been a prison I built myself. Now it was a map back to the people I loved. And that, I realized, was the real legacy I wanted to leave behind. Not the deals I closed or the titles I held, but the time I chose to give to the people who mattered most.